Newton and his laws. Wren, who perhaps had more cash on hand than the others, from designing St. Paul Cathedral and other buildings, offered a prize to anyone who could derive the shape of planetary orbits under such an inverse square law. Even at that time, everyone knew that Isaac Newton was the smartest one around, although he mostly kept to himself up in Cambridge. Eventually, Halley worked up the courage to pay him a visit. Newton received him graciously, and Halley proposed the question of the shape of orbits subject to an inverse square force. Newton instantly replied that it would be an ellipse. Somewhat taken aback, Halley probed further, asking how he could be so sure. Why, Newton offered, I have calculated it. It remains a little unclear precisely how Newton carried out the original calculation. What we know is that Halley prodded him to write something up, which ultimately led to a short paper that Halley presented to the Royal Society. That first publication was lacking in some details, so Halley pressed the great man to flesh things out a bit. Once he set to doing so, Newton couldn't be stopped. 18 months later, he had produced Philosophiae Naturalis Principia Mathematica, or in English, Mathematical Principles of Natural Philosophy, usually shortened to the Principia. Arguably the most influential work in modern intellectual history. The Principia not only established the system of classical mechanics that remained unchallenged until the 20th century, it also proposed the full law of gravitation, derived Kepler's law from basic principles, and presented the first hints of what we know now as calculus. Newton had developed calculus pretty far, but he was reluctant to deploy it fully in the Principia, since the techniques were new and bound to be controversial. As a result, he ended up in a bitter dispute with Leibniz, who developed the ideas independently and whose notation eventually came into common use. Newton also ended up in a bitter dispute with Hooke over the inverse square law. He ended up in a lot of bitter disputes. Classical mechanics is a system, not merely a theory of some particular physical phenomenon. It is a comprehensive way of thinking about how the physical world works, one that was almost universally accepted as true until the advent of quantum mechanics. We've seen how a large number of very smart people struggle over the course of hundreds of years to get a grasp of momentum, force, and motion. Newton thought about it carefully and simply presented what seemed to be the right answer. As modern-day cosmologist Rocky Kolb has put it, to compare the accomplishment of Newton to that of the first manned flight, one would have to imagine Orville and Wilbur Wright pulling up on the sands of Kitty Hawk on December 17, 1903, behind the controls of a modern jetliner and flying off to New York. So what did Newton actually say? We will dig further into classical mechanics in the next chapter, but as far as the motion of the planets is concerned, there are two crucial ideas. First, if the natural motion of object is to continue in a straight line at a constant velocity, deviation from that motion can be characterized by the acceleration of that body, the rate of which the velocity changes. Like velocity itself, acceleration is going to be a factor, since we can imagine accelerating in different directions. Newton's second law of motion, the most famous equation in classical physics, states that the acceleration of an object is proportional to the net force acting on it, with the constant of proportionality provided by the object's mass. F equals ma. The first law is that the velocity will be constant when there is no force, and the third law says that bodies act on each other with equal and opposite force. Often there will be more than one force acting on an object at one time, in which case we simply add up the individual contribution to get the overall force. which is responsible for the acceleration. Because vectors have a direction as well as a magnitude, two big forces can add up to give small net force, if they are pointing in opposite direction or nearly so. We can divide both sides of equation 2.1 by m to get the acceleration in terms of the force, A equal F divided by m. The second idea is Newton's law of universal gravitation, the final version of the inverse square law that Hooke and others had talked about. What was indisputably Newton's was the idea that the law was indeed universal. It explains how apples fall from trees as well as how planets move around the sun. We take this for granted now, but back in the day it was a dramatic leap to connect planetary motion to everyday occurrence in the local orchard. Consider two celestial objects with masses m1 and m2 and a distance r between them. Let ER be a unit vector, a vector of length 1 in whatever units we are using to measure distance, pointing from object 2 to object 1. Then Newton says that the force acting on object 2 due to the gravitational pull of object 1 is given by F equal G m1 m2 ER divided by r square. The number G is a constant of nature, now known as Newton's gravitational constant, that tells us how strong the force of gravity is. From the point of view of object 2, object 1 is the source of gravity, the physical property creating the force, and vice versa. This equation looks a bit more elaborate than our previous one, but if we sit and think about it, we once again see a proportionality relationship between two vectors. The force F exerted on object 2 by object 1 and a unit length vector ER pointing from 2 to 1. The notational complexity simply reflects the fact that the proportionality factors involves Newton's constant as well as the two masses, and then we divide by the square of the distance. This attaches a precise numerical value to the amount of pull that the sun exerts on the planet, which is substantial when you are nearby and fades as you get farther away. From these two simple rules, the second law of motion and the law of universal gravitation, Newton was able to reproduce all of Kepler's law and much more. He showed, for example, that the gravitational force due to a spherical body is exactly the same as it would be if the same amount of mass were concentrated at a single point at the center. So it's okay to treat the sun and planets as if they were single points rather than solid objects, at least in the approximation where we treat them as perfectly spherical. Equally important, we can go beyond the idealization of treating each planet as orbiting the sun in isolation, with Newton's rules in hand. We can ask, for example, about how the orbit of Jupiter, the most massive planet in the solar system, affects the motion of the other planets. It was a whole new way of looking at celestial mechanics, which to this day is more than accurate enough to pilot a rocket ship to the moon.